They thought I'd stay quiet. They thought I'd swallow the lies, accept the excuses, and pretend the truth didn't matter. For months, I watched powerful people twist the narrative, smirking, waving their flags, screaming that someone else messed up first, as if that magically erased their own guilt. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. This is the story of how I took on an entire political machine, how their arrogance became my weapon, how their lies became the rope they eventually hung themselves with, and how I made sure the truth they hid came back to destroy them. If you've ever been lied to by someone in power, if you've ever felt gaslit, dismissed, or told you were overreacting, then you're going to want to hear this one all the way through. Hit like, subscribe, and let's get into how I turned the biggest political cover-up of the decade into the ultimate revenge against the people who thought they were untouchable. I didn't set out to become anyone's enemy. I didn't wake up one morning thinking, today is the day I take on half of Congress. I'm just a regular person, a staffer, a researcher, a nobody on the federal payroll whose job was supposed to be boring, stable, predictable. But that was before I ended up assigned to the one committee that would change everything, the one with access to the Epstein files. Now, before you imagine some glamorous TV moment, me in a dimly lit room, files stacked dramatically around me. Let me burst that bubble. Real government work looks like old fluorescent lights, coffee that tastes like burnt printer ink, and cold folders filled with legal jargon so dense it could suffocate you. But it also looks like truth. Raw, unfiltered, ugly truth. When the investigation officially closed in July 2025, everyone in the building felt the shift in the air. The gag orders lifted. The dust settled. The excuses evaporated. It was supposed to be the moment transparency finally won. You'd think everyone would be relieved. Instead, that's when the panic started. I remember the first meeting that tipped me off. The day everything changed. It was late. Congress loves late meetings because they assume no one's recording. I sat in the corner of the conference room, typing notes like I always did. The senior aides shuffled in first, trading stiff smiles and fake pleasantries. Then the Republican committee leads walked in, tight-lipped, nervous, trying so hard to look unbothered that it was obvious something was wrong. They closed the door, locked it. Then the chairman cleared his throat. "We are not releasing the files," he announced, each word landing like a punch. Another member asked, confused, "But the investigation is over. Legally, I don't care if it's over." The chairman snapped, "We're not handing the other side ammunition." That was the first time I felt it. The heavy, suffocating weight of injustice settling on my chest, like someone had placed a cinder block over my ribs. My fingers froze over the keyboard. I knew what those files meant. I knew how many families spent years begging for clarity. I knew how many victims had waited for closure. And these people, these smug, self-righteous power hoarders, thought they could bury the truth because it might be politically inconvenient. The meeting devolved fast. Excuses. Deflections. Finger pointing. Democrats didn't release anything under Biden, someone muttered. That was when I snapped my head up. Not because I was shocked, but because I was angry. The kind of anger that simmers quietly, burning through your bloodstream like acid. Because I'd been in the briefings, I'd seen the timelines. I knew the investigation wasn't even finished until mid-2025. Everyone in that room knew it too. But that's the thing about politicians. They don't lie because they're stupid. They lie because they think you're stupid. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, disdainful, dismissive, treating the truth like a bargaining chip instead of what it was, people's lives. Real people who were hurt, used, ignored. My heart wouldn't slow down. My mind wouldn't stop replaying their tone. How casual they were about hiding it all. I knew I couldn't let it go, but the real turning point, the moment it became personal, came the next morning. I walked into the office, tired, clutching my coffee like a lifeline. My badge beeped at the security checkpoint. Nothing unusual. But as I walked toward my desk, I noticed the stares. Not friendly ones, curious ones, suspicious ones. A few whispered to each other as I passed. I sat down and unlocked my computer. A new email popped up from the senior counsel. Subject line, MEING. Nubbo. My stomach dropped. Inside the small conference room, she didn't bother with pleasantries. "We heard you took unusually detailed notes during last night's meeting." My blood turned icy. I always take detailed notes. That's literally my job. She leaned forward, eyes cold. "There are some things you don't document. You understand? Are you asking me to delete them?" "I'm telling you to forget them," she replied, "for your own good." Those 4 words hit harder than any threat. For your own good. That's what they say right before they ruin your life. I walked out of that room shaking. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. The hallway felt too bright, too loud, like every sound was amplified. The hum of the lights, the distant chatter, the soft echo of my own footsteps. I sat at my desk and stared at my notes, stared at the truth they wanted erased. And something inside me hardened. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the realization that if I didn't act, no one else would. But that was the moment the idea of revenge took root. It didn't bloom instantly. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, like a seed buried deep in soil, waiting for the right conditions to grow. And it grew fast, because the more they tried to silence me, the more determined I became to expose them. Every whisper, every side eye, every coded warning only fueled me. But the real spark, the one that turned quiet determination into full force vengeance, came a few days later. I overheard them talking about me. I wasn't supposed to be in the hallway outside the subcommittee room, but I had to pick up a stack of briefs. As I approached, I heard my name. "She's a liability, too observant. We need to isolate her before she talks." Isolate, like I was a contagion. Then the worst part, Will claimed she misunderstood. "She's young, emotional, probably biased, biased, emotional." The classic dismissal of anyone trying to speak truth to power. That was when the humiliation hit, a hot, suffocating wave that crawled up my throat. My eyes stung, and for one terrifying moment, I thought I might actually cry right there in the hallway. Not because they insulted me, but because I finally understood the game. They didn't fear the truth. They feared who the truth would expose. And they'd already decided I was disposable. That was the moment something inside me snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly and permanently. Like a lock clicking into place. I wasn't going to be their scapegoat. I wasn't going to let them twist the narrative. And I sure as hell wasn't going to let them bury the truth and walk away clean. Not anymore. Because if they thought I was a liability before, they hadn't seen anything yet. You'd think that once I realized they were targeting me, I'd immediately go into fight mode. That I'd storm into offices, demand accountability, slam my fist on tables. But that's not how fear works. Fear is quiet. It slithers under your skin, coils around your ribs, and squeezes just enough to remind you that you're vulnerable. For the next week, that feeling never left me. The retaliation didn't start big. It started small, the kind of small that masquerades as coincidence. My access to shared drives suddenly glitched. Emails I sent mysteriously never arrived. I got removed from meetings I had always been part of. On paper, nothing looked malicious. But in my gut, I felt the shift. Like someone had subtly turned the temperature up by 1 degree every hour. Slow enough that most wouldn't notice, but unmistakable once you realized you were boiling. The first real blow came on a Thursday. I walked into the office and found boxes stacked by my desk. My desk. The desk I had sat at for 2 years. Maintenance issue. A supervisor claimed, not meeting my eyes. "We need to move you downstairs temporarily." Downstairs. Every staffer knew what that meant. The basement wasn't an office. It was a graveyard. A windowless room where people were sent when leadership wanted them out of sight and out of mind. The walls were the color of old oatmeal. The fluorescent lights flickered like they were on life support. The air smelled faintly of mildew and warm dust. The hum of an ancient HVAC unit swallowed every thought I tried to have. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty desk, the outdated computer, the silence so heavy it felt physical. This wasn't an accident. This was isolation, weaponized. And still, I stayed quiet, not because I wanted to be weak, but because I had to be careful. They were watching, waiting for me to misstep. I spent days in that basement, typing in a stale chair while the ceiling buzzed overhead. Every time I logged in, I wondered if they were monitoring my keystrokes. Every time I walked through the hallway, I felt eyes on me. Every night, I tried to sleep, but my mind replayed every whisper, every side, glance, every half smirk from the committee staff who thought I didn't see them. I started having trouble breathing in the mornings. My chest stayed tight all day, like someone was pressing a thumb into my sternum. Even my dreams weren't safe. They were filled with locked doors, shred bins, and muffled conversations just out of earshot. My family noticed something was wrong. But what could I say? Hey, Mom, guess what? The people running the government are trying to erase me. Yeah, that would go over great. Still, I tried to keep my routine, tried to pretend this wasn't happening. But the stress ate at me. Some days I felt hollow. Others I felt like I could combust. Then came the day they tried to break me for good. I had been told to deliver a packet to a senior aide in the main building. It was a simple errand, nothing unusual. But as I walked down the hallway, I noticed the security guy, Greg, watching me from his post. Greg had always been friendly. We'd talked about football, his kids, his terrible taste in music. But that day, he wouldn't look away. As I approached, he finally called out, "Hey, can you come here a second?" My pulse spiked. Something wrong?" He lowered his voice. "Just be careful. They've been asking questions about you. Weird questions." My throat went dry. What kind of questions? He hesitated, looked around. Questions like whether you've shared information with anyone outside the building. I felt my knees go weak. "I haven't," I whispered. "You know I haven't." "I know," he said. "But they're trying to build a case. Make sure you watch your back." The folder in my hands suddenly felt heavier. The hallway felt longer. My footsteps sounded too loud, too revealing. As I turned, Greg added one last thing. "They're trying to push you out. Don't let them surprise you." I didn't realize I was shaking until the packet trembled in my grip. That night, I went home and finally broke. The tears came fast, hot, uncontrollable. Not just fear, humiliation, rage, exhaustion. It wasn't fair. I had done nothing wrong. They were the ones burying truth, but I was the one being punished. Around 2 a.m., I got out of bed and sat alone in the dark of my living room. The silence was so deep it rang in my ears. The streetlight outside cast a faint glow through the blinds, striping the room in horizontal shadows. I wrapped my arms around myself and rocked slightly. Small, involuntary, like my body was trying to comfort itself because no one else could. I whispered into the dark, "Why me?" The answer came immediately, as if someone had spoken it aloud, "Because you saw." That was the moment something changed. The fear didn't vanish, but it transformed, crystallized into something sharper. Not recklessness, not impulsiveness. Resolve. They wanted me scared, they wanted me silent, they wanted me small and cooperative. But if I was going down, I was going down on my terms. The next day, they delivered the final, intentional insult. The one that pushed me from survival mode into retaliation mode. I logged into the system and found a new note in my HR file. "Employee demonstrates patterns of emotional volatility and questionable loyalty." I froze. My vision tunneled. The air thinned. My ears rang like I was underwater. Volatility. Questionable loyalty. They were building the narrative, the framework, the justification. They were preparing to discredit me. And in that moment, standing alone in a stale basement office with a flickering light above me, I realized something. They thought they'd cornered me. They thought they'd already won. They thought I was powerless. But they'd made one critical mistake. They underestimated how far a person will go when the truth is the only weapon they have left. The moment I saw the HR note accusing me of emotional volatility and questionable loyalty, something inside me snapped. Not in an explosive way, not in a reckless way, but in that cold, crystal clear way a person reaches when they've cried all their tears, when they've been humiliated enough times to become immune, when fear stops being paralyzing and becomes fuel. I closed the HR window slowly, deliberately, like sealing the lid on a coffin. They had just made their final mistake. If they wanted a villain, fine, I could be a villain. But I would be a villain with purpose, a villain with evidence, a villain with the one thing they had underestimated: access. You see, even though they shoved me into the basement dungeon, they forgot one important detail. The digital permissions tied to my role hadn't been fully revoked. A lazy oversight on their part. A golden opportunity for me. They thought isolating me would make me desperate and sloppy. But isolation gave me something far more dangerous than panic time. Hours alone, uninterrupted. No coworkers wandering by. No supervisors hovering, just silence. And a computer. The very first time I tested my access, my heart was pounding so hard I thought I might throw up. I opened the secure committee portal expecting to be blocked. Instead, a CCSS granted, I froze. My breath caught. For a second, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. They shoved me into the basement, but left me holding the key to the vault. And what was inside that vault? Everything they didn't want the public to see. Everything victims had waited years for. Everything powerful people were terrified might surface. The files, the transcripts, the sealed testimonies, the internal communications, even the pre-investigation drafts, raw, unfiltered, unredacted, all of it. I clicked open the first folder, and the screen filled with names. Names I had only seen whispered. Names tied to people who had spent fortunes burying the truth. My throat tightened. My fingertips went numb. I remember whispering to myself, "Holly God." Some part of me still expected a hand to clamp down on my shoulder, for security to storm in, for alarms to blare. But nothing happened. Just the hum of the HVACs and the faint flicker of the overhead light. I wasn't caught. Not yet. I spent the next few days moving like a ghost. I smiled politely. I answered emails. I delivered packets. I pretended to be harmless. But inside, I was building a plan. I couldn't just leak everything recklessly. That would make me look unstable. That would give them exactly the narrative they needed to destroy me. No, I needed a plan that was clean, precise, incontestable. A plan that would expose them and protect me. And the more I thought about it, the more obvious the answer became: metadata. Every time a file is accessed, every time a note is altered, every time someone attempts to lock a document, it leaves a trace, a digital footprint. If I could prove they were actively hiding the files after the investigation ended, if I could show they were lying about ongoing proceedings, if I could correlate timestamps with their internal communications, I wouldn't just be leaking evidence. I'd be exposing the cover-up. Not even their own party could defend them after that. So I started documenting, quietly, meticulously, patiently. At first, it was tiny things: one screenshot, one log, one export. I stored everything on a flash drive no larger than my thumbnail, hidden behind the cheap plastic vent under my desk. It looked like a broken screw. No one would ever find it unless they knew exactly where to look. Then I started noticing patterns: deletion attempts, access restrictions, edits to summaries, backdated entries, user accounts accidentally disabled. And threaded through the metadata like rot were the fingerprints of the same committee members who swore publicly that they wanted full transparency. They were lying, boldly, repeatedly, and stupidly. The arrogance made me nauseous. But it also made my job easier. Still, gathering evidence wasn't enough. I needed a way to release it that couldn't be traced back to me. A way that forced their hand before they could spin the narrative. A way they wouldn't see coming. The answer came during a late night doom scroll session when I stumbled across a congressional whistleblower report from years earlier. The report wasn't important. What mattered was how it was released. Automatically, anonymously, triggered by a timed script, delivered simultaneously to multiple oversight bodies, newsrooms, and advocacy groups. A digital dead man's switch. My heartbeat quickened. This was it. This was how I'd win. If they retaliated, if they fired me, if they tried to smear me, the truth would drop automatically. And because it would be sent to so many places, they couldn't bury it. Couldn't delete it. Couldn't pretend it didn't exist. I spent 3 nights straight building the system. Coffee. Dark circles. Hands trembling from exhaustion. Eyes burning from staring at screens too long. But the plan came together beautifully. I created multiple encrypted copies of everything, hidden in cloud drives on offline storage, and even embedded in benign-looking PDFs. I wrote a script that would activate if I didn't log in within 72 hours. One misstep from them, one forced leave of absence, one wrongful termination, one bogus investigation, boom. Truth bomb. But here's the thing, even the best plans need timing, coordination, patience. I had to wait for the perfect moment to set everything in motion. That moment came sooner than expected. It was a Monday morning when I was called into yet another urgent meeting. I walked into a conference room filled with people who wouldn't look at me. The senior counsel sat at the end of the table with a file in front of her. She folded her hands. Her smile was rehearsed, cold, predatory. "We've been reviewing your conduct," she said, "and we're concerned you may not be the right fit for this environment." My chest tightened, but not from fear this time. They were about to do it. Push me out, silence me. I kept my voice calm. "Is this a formal warning?" "It's the first step," she said. "We're giving you a chance to correct course. A chance." There it was, the threat pretending to be a gift. I nodded slowly. Inside, my pulse was steady, almost eerily calm, because I knew something they didn't know. The clock had already started. The trap was already set, and with every word they spoke, with every fabricated accusation, with every smug look, they were tightening the noose around their own necks. When I walked out of that room, I didn't feel broken. I felt alive, energized, focused, sharp. For the first time in weeks, I felt something that had been completely absent: power. Not the kind that comes from authority, not the kind that comes from rank or title, the kind that comes from truth, from evidence, from knowing exactly what your enemies don't know. That night, I made the final preparations. I ran through the dead man's switch one last time. I synchronized the timelines. I wrote a final, irrefutable summary tying every action they took to the cover-up. Then I did something symbolic, small but deeply satisfying. I put my committee badge on the table, and I whispered, "Let's finish this," because the plan wasn't a theory anymore. It was ready, and they had already lit the fuse. The morning everything detonated started with an eerie calm, that strange, heavy silence right before a storm breaks open. I woke up before the alarm. No panic, no tightness in my chest, just clarity. It was the kind of clarity you feel when you know a chapter of your life is about to end. One way or another, I showered, dressed, sat on the edge of my bed, and checked the time, 7:02 a.m. The dead man's switch would trigger at 9:15 a.m. Unless I manually logged into my workstation. I didn't plan to. Walking into the building that day felt surreal. The metal detector beeped softly. The badge scanner flashed its green light. Staffers rushed around in their usual frantic pace. But I wasn't part of the chaos anymore. I was the comm center, the eye of the hurricane. As I descended the stairs to the basement office for the last time, I paused at the bottom step. This room, the stale walls, the flickering light, the humming vents, had become a symbol of everything they tried to do to me. Humiliate me, isolate me, break me. But today, it would become the birthplace of their downfall. I sat at my desk, placed my hands on the keyboard, and didn't log in. Instead, I opened a blank document and wrote 3 simple lines. This is not a resignation. This is accountability for all of us. Then I printed it, folded it, slipped it into my bag. At 8:27 a.m., I heard footsteps coming down the stairs. 2 sets, firm, brisk, purposeful. I already knew who it was. Senior counsel and the deputy chief of staff. They didn't knock. They walked right in like they owned the air in the room. The counsel's face was tight, stretched thin with performative concern. "We need to talk," she said. I leaned back in my chair, calm. "Of course. What's the urgent matter today?" She motioned to the deputy, who produced a folder thick with papers. "We've decided to move forward with a formal internal investigation into your conduct," he said. There it was, the hammer, the move that they thought would crush me. I didn't blink. "What conduct?" I asked. "Erratic behavior," the counsel said flatly. "Unauthorized access to restricted materials. Potential leaking of sensitive documents. Hostile attitude toward colleagues." The deputy added, "Until the investigation is complete, you will be placed on administrative leave." Administrative leave. That was the trigger phrase. The dead man's switch. The release mechanism, the match. If I didn't log in, the truth would detonate. I stood up slowly, not shaking, not breaking down, strong. "Before I leave," I said, "I have something for you." I reached into my bag and handed them the folded paper. The counsel unfolded it, expecting to see a resignation. Her eyebrows pulled together. "What is this?" "A statement," I said, "for the record." She read it once, confused. Read it again, frowning, then looked up sharply. "What does this mean?" I smiled. "It means," I said softly, "that the truth is about to speak for itself." Her eyes narrowed. She opened her mouth to respond. And then her phone buzzed. She glanced down at the screen. Her face went white. The deputy's phone buzzed too. Then the office phone. Then the emergency line on the wall. And somewhere upstairs, I heard the echo of another phone shrilling angrily. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with adrenaline-fueled anticipation. "What's happening?" the deputy muttered, fumbling with his screen. Their expressions changed in perfect synchronization: shock, confusion, disbelief, then fear. And I knew. 9:15 a.m. the files had dropped. All of them. Thousands of documents, metadata logs, internal emails, deletion attempts, backdated edits, cover-up instructions, congressional communications, everything, and not just to one place: 3 federal oversight offices, 2 watchdog groups, 4 major newsrooms, 7 independent investigative journalists, and a public archive link scheduled to publish at 9:30 a.m. if not manually stopped. Whoa! The counsel sputtered, pointing at me. "What did you do?" I tilted my head. Me. Nothing. "You put me on leave, remember? I wasn't even logged in." She lunged forward. "Undo it! Take it back! Stop whatever you started." "You can't stop it?" I said. "It's already gone." The deputy's hands were shaking as he tapped frantically on his phone. This is hundreds of files, thousands. How cool. I looked at them evenly. "You wanted to hide them? The investigation was over. You had no legal reason to withhold anything. You lied about transparency. You targeted me. You tried to ruin me." I stepped closer, close enough that they could see the certainty in my eyes. So I made sure the truth couldn't be buried. The counsel's voice broke into a shrill scream. "Why OUV destroyed US? No," I said gently. "You destroyed yourselves." I simply let the world see it. Her face twisted with something feral. Rage, fear, hatred all tangled together. "You'll go to prison for this? You hear me?" "Prison?" I shrugged. "That's for investigators to decide. But at least now they'll be investigating the right people." The deputy slammed his laptop shut as alerts kept popping up. "This is a catastrophe," he muttered. "A complete meltdown. Every agency is calling us. This is, my God, this is career ending." I gave a sympathetic nod. "I know." Upstairs, chaos erupted. Doors slamming, phones ringing nonstop, people yelling, security scrambling. The sound spread like a wave, floor by floor, panic and shock radiating outward. It was the soundtrack of consequences finally catching up. The counsel rounded on me again. "This isn't over," she hissed. "Oh, it is," I said quietly. "Just not for me." I picked up my bag, slipped the strap over my shoulder, and walked past them. As I climbed the stairs, staffers rushed past me, frantic, pale, whispering loudly, "Did you see the leak? Names, dates, internal emails? Holy shat. They're done, completely done. Career's over, maybe indictments." Oh my God, this changes everything. When I reached the main floor, Greg, the security guard, looked at me with wide eyes.
"Was this you?"
he whispered. I paused, gave him a faint smile. "Greg, I was never here." He let out the smallest laugh, a proud, stunned, quiet laugh, and he nodded me through. I stepped out into the cold morning air. The sun was sharp and bright, warming my face, and for the first time in months, I felt free. Not because I'd escaped, but because I'd won. I didn't go back to that building. Not that day. Not ever. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Hearings, investigations, resignations, careers imploding on live television. Reporters lined the steps of Congress for days, microphones in hand, demanding explanations that no one could give without incriminating themselves. Victims finally got answers. Families finally got closure. The public finally saw the truth. And me, I didn't become a hero, or a whistleblower celebrity, or a political figure. I became something much simpler, a reminder. A reminder that no matter how powerful someone is, no matter how deeply they bury evidence, no matter how shamelessly they lie, truth is a living thing. And eventually it claws its way out. Some nights, I still think about that basement office. The flickering lights, the quiet, the fear. But then I remember the moment I walked out the door. The moment the sun hit my face. The moment I realized they had no power over me anymore. And I smile, because revenge isn't always loud. It isn't always violent. Sometimes it's a quiet click, a line of code, a timed script. Sometimes Revenge is simply truth delivered at the perfect moment if you made it this far. Thank you for listening to one of the wildest revenge stories I've ever had to relive. If you believe truth matters, no matter who it exposes, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me what you would have done in my place. And remember, sometimes the most powerful weapon you have is simply refusing to stay silent.